This is our 52nd webinar in our talk series. A special welcome to our speaker and author, Dr. Sujatha Kelkar Shetty, for making the time to be with us here today. Before we introduce our speaker today, and for those who were not there earlier and have joined us today, Rtambhara Wellness is a collective of like-minded individuals that look at wellness in a holistic way, not just the body, but the mind as well, and all through the practice of knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage. We conduct corporate programs and retreats for wellness that look at personal transformation and tapping into oneself to unlock our infinite potential. Presently, we're conducting these programs virtually, and our virtual corporate programs are uploaded on our website, rtambharawellness.com. Do visit our website and go through the details of these programs. We also conduct webinars regularly on topics that delve into self-discovery, personal transformation, health, harmony, and holistic well-being, as well as the arts, which help us connect with our higher selves. All our earlier talks are uploaded on YouTube under Rtambhara Wellness. If you'd like to be part of our community, the details of where you can connect with us are posted on the chat. Alternately, please post your contact details, cell number, email ID, so we can add you to our groups. So let's get to, we'll get on with today's program. Dr. Sujatha Kelkar Shetty will be talking to us today on 99 Not Out, her book, Your Guide to a Long and Healthy Life. Today's session will have 45 minutes of talk, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A. A request to all of you to stay muted through the talk, but please keep your videos on and feel free to post your questions on the chat function, and Dr. Sujatha will answer any questions in the realm of well-being. May I now call upon our Director Marketing, Mr. Rohan Nayak, to introduce our speaker today. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Binaji. Welcome, everyone. Today, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Sujatha to all of you. Dr. Sujatha Kelkar Shetty is a US-trained biological scientist with publications in peer-reviewed journals. She did her postdoctoral training from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. While at the National Institute of Health, she was curious about the interaction between the mind and the body and studied the mechanisms of how mental stress negatively impacts our physical health. Dr. Shetty has been focused on researching and writing on preventive health for the last decade. She wrote a regular preventive health column for Mint, the leading business newspaper of India, for many years. Her writing is unique in its emphasis on cutting-edge medical research and age-old Ayurvedic practices. Her book, 99 Not Out, Your Guide to a Long and Healthy Life, was published by Penguin Random House in May 2019. The book received many excellent reviews in Indian dailies and magazines. Dr. Shetty gives health and wellness related seminars and workshops to corporates and has worked with organizations like Infosys, Pricewaterhouse, TCS, Ernst & Young. Like her writing, her well-being seminars and workshops are unique in their emphasis on research studies that unequivocally show how and why certain lifestyle habits enhance well-being and prevent both mental and physical disease. Without much ado, over to you, Doctor.
Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, Binaji. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. I'm excited to talk about the book and the 29 wellness principles, as I call them, that are outlined in it. Many of them, and knowing how this community that has come together already has come together under the premise of understanding that the spiritual is at the crux of it all, and the physical, mental, and social sort of flowers from it. This book and the contents are not going to come as a surprise to you. I think a lot of it you will already know, but it covers the mind, body, and what I call the spirit space. It essentially has evidence-based techniques, if you will, that we know either from Western medical research or from Ayurveda. And, when it comes to Ayurveda, it's important for us to understand that because there is an absence of evidence, it doesn't mean there's an evidence of absence. So it's interesting that, the first thing that allopathic doctors remark about Ayurveda is that, but there aren't enough studies, or this has not been proved, right?
Mhm.
And the point with Ayurveda, as you all know, is that it is empirical science. And that doesn't mean that it's any less powerful. However, my book is largely, though I believe 200% in Ayurveda's powers, if you will, this book largely has focused on Western medicine because my training is in Western medicine, and my argument is, listen to these principles because there is evidence backing them, and so that's sort of where this book comes from. It also comes from 10 years of reading and writing in this space. I've been writing on health and wellness, and primarily preventive health, how we can prevent disease from emerging, for the last 10 years. So it's really an amalgam of a lot of reading, a lot of thinking, and I hope you get a chance to go through it. Over to you, Beenaji.
Yeah, thank you. I have actually gone through it, and whatever you said is bang on. And you're absolutely right. There's so much to, a lot of it is stuff that we know, but, somebody has to put it together, and backed with the evidence that you've actually put in there, it makes it all the more important and meaningful. So I wanted to ask you, in a remarkable forward, Dr. Farooq Udwadia, cardiologist and senior medical advisor, Breach Candy Hospital Trust in Mumbai, says that you call it the art of longevity and take a holistic view of what constitutes good health. Is good health only an absence of disease, or is it something more? Can you expand on this?
Yes. So, Beenaji, Dr. Udwadia writing the foreword was like a huge coup for me, right? And when he agreed, I almost asked him, "Really? Are you sure?" And then he wrote this, poetic and beautiful foreword. And he's really an example of how a life lived well looks like. So he's about 88 years old now, and he's running the Breach Candy Hospital, and he starts his rounds every morning at the top of the ICU, which is the top of the hospital, and then walks his way down. And I'm not saying everybody has to be as active as he is, but it's also his philosophy, and he's very spiritual, and also a deeply and a sort of a deep listener when it comes to music and classical music. But yes, to go into the question that you asked, the thing about our bodies and minds to keep in mind is that we often wait till disease strikes us before we do something about looking after our mind-body complex. And the WHO has a lovely definition of health. The WHO says, it is not merely the absence of disease and infirmity, but also the presence of sound physical, mental, and social well-being. And that's what I think of as when I said the art of longevity in the introduction, that, we really need to remember that we need to look after and strengthen the resilience of our mind and body, even through these times, to and therefore really reach that sense of well-being, maybe not all the time, but at least some of the times, which should be, which would make our lives that much brighter, that much more enjoyable to experience. And yeah.
Thank you. There's some quotes from the book which I think I should share it with everybody because I found them very interesting. There are a lot of uncertainties, but getting older is one of life's certainties. But we can choose to live out most of our lifetimes in bright-eyed alertness and good health. So living in wellness then is an active and conscious process of taking care of your mind, body, and spirit. And this is from your book. So this is from the book itself. And there's another one that I liked very much, which says that scientific studies show that only 25% of how long we live is determined by our family history or our genes. The remaining 75% is determined by how we manage our mind, body, and spirit. So, Doctor, much has been said about the physical part of longevity. So, let's talk about the mind first. You mentioned some very interesting facets of the mind and our thoughts, attitudes that aid in longevity. So, can you expand on a few of them? You talked about fixed and growth mindsets. You talked about self awareness and mindfulness. And you talk about compassion and self compassion. So,
Yeah.
how do these help in how do they aid or help in longevity?
Yeah. So, Binaji, this is all very close to my heart because strengthening the mind, particularly during these times, becomes so very important. And talking about the first, when we talk about the fixed and the growth mindset, the fixed mindset is a mindset. Mindsets are just beliefs, right? They're just what you believe. That's it. That's what a mindset is. It's very straightforward. But a fixed mindset, which is typically how we grow up, is the mindset where you think that what you are is all that you can be, where you don't believe in growth, where you take failure as being a momentous experience, where you think you can't possibly get up from it. Like the F word is a bad word. Failure is a bad experience. And you think you can't grow, you can't get better, you can't get stronger, you can't change, your talents are as they are when you were born. And while a growth mindset is one where you believe that you can grow, you can flower, you can change, you can become better, you can become stronger with effort, with hard work, with perseverance. And now, as the two mindsets, when you start to think about them, would suggest, it's the growth mindset, people who are in the growth mindset, and a growth mindset can be cultivated. It's like any other skill. You can learn to inhabit the growth mindset if you don't already. And in a growth mindset, you're more likely to engage in healthful behaviors. You're more likely to gain healthful habits. You're going to be less stressed because you know that any situation is not the be all and end all. You know that you can recover from it, you can grow from it, that you will become stronger with it. So so being in a growth mindset means you will be able to handle stress better. Being in a growth mindset means that you will be able to engage with healthful behaviors better. And as Binaji just mentioned from the book, only a small percentage of the risk of getting lifestyle diseases is determined by our genes. The larger percentage actually depends upon our behaviors. And if we have a mindset where we can change our behavior to a more healthful behavior, whether it is exercise or sleep, very important, right? Or eating right, eating more fresh fruits and vegetables, or losing the weight that we need to lose, or gaining, staying in a more positive state of emotion, because that's also very powerful. Being optimistic has been found to extend your lifespan, everything else being equal. So given all of these things, being in a growth mindset is truly powerful, right? Because it gives you the opportunity to really change your behaviors towards what will serve your mind body in the long term. The second chapter that Binaji mentioned from the mind section again of the book is compassion and self-compassion. Now, compassion is, of course, we all know about compassion, and we could all talk about it, I'm sure. We've heard enough about it. We've all seen Dalai Lama as quotes. We believe in it in theory and in practice as human beings. But it's the self-compassion piece that I'd like to speak to you a little bit about, because we tend to think that it's self-indulgence, and actually it's not, right? So self-compassion is something that has been studied by researchers, and there are essentially three pillars to it. One is self-kindness, being as kind to yourself as you would be to your best friend. The other is awareness, being aware that you are actually sharing the same human continuum as other human beings. So you are all interconnected. If you have your trials and tribulations, Your neighbor does too. They're all unique, but each of us have our own ups and downs, our trials and tribulations, which we're all connected. That's awareness. And the third is mindfulness, right? So knowing that what happens inside you, and being aware of what happens inside you, which is self-awareness, and being aware of what happens outside of you. And I think the Chinese have it really down with their character. So the character for mindfulness is Tian, which is a combination of the heart and the now. So it's about having your heart in the now. And obviously it takes practice, particularly in today's world with the multitude of distractions and all the various devices that we are on. It isn't easy, but it is required. It is definitely required for our long-term well-being. But these three together make self-compassion. And research has shown that people who are self-compassionate are also compassionate. So it's a given. If you are going to be self-compassionate, you'll automatically extend that to your fellow beings. But you're also going to be in better physical health. You're also going to be in better mental health. You will also have fewer like aches and pains. So it's well worth cultivating, right? And as you can imagine, and this is true, self-compassionate people are also more likely to call the doctor when they need help, or they're going to engage in healthful behaviors, again because they care about their well-being at a level that matters. When we talk about mindfulness and self-awareness, which is another chapter. Now, each of these chapters, Binaji, we could actually talk about and only talk about that, right? Because there's so much to discuss. But since we're going, I'm just quickly going over them. The self-awareness and the mindfulness piece is also really, really powerful. And I wanted to share just one study on mindfulness and aging to just, because we know what mindfulness is. We've all heard of it before. But I want you to think about mindfulness also in the context of your beliefs, because many of our beliefs are really unexamined, right? And even when new evidence comes in front of us that may make us reevaluate our beliefs, often we don't. And those beliefs then determine our health and how we play out our lives. And research has shown us this. So to give you an example, this was a study that was done by Dr. Ellen Langer, who's a Harvard psychologist. She was the first woman psychologist at Harvard, and she's done a bunch of very, very cool studies. But this particular study was one where she looked at people who were now living in nursing homes, because in America, that is the culture. And she basically asked them and she divided them into two, right? One group had seen their grandparents when they were toddlers. So that when they were 2 or 3 years old is when they had not only seen their grandparents, lived with their grandparents. And then the other set of them had lived with their grandparents when they were teenagers. Now, as you can imagine, the ones who had lived with their grandparents when they were toddlers had grandparents who were very active. They were relatively younger, more robust, and also they had to run around with the toddlers. They couldn't really be quite stationary. They had to move with the toddlers. So, and then the other group had older grandparents, and grandparents who were maybe perhaps more sedentary. They were older. They also didn't have to run around so much with their grandkids. The grandkids are probably not interested in hanging out with adults at that time anyway. So there was less of an interaction. But what was curious was that their health was impacted by the impression that they had of how older people are supposed to behave based on how their grandparents behaved. So because they had seen, so the group that had seen grandparents who are active and young at heart and sort of running around were doing better physically and mentally than those who had not, or who had seen differently. So because we make these, she calls these premature cognitive commitments about aging, they can be really powerful indicators of how we will age. Obviously, this doesn't have to happen to all of us, but even the fact that it does happen is something to chew on, right? It is something to examine. So it's very important to, again, if you inhabit the growth mindset, and the brain is far more plastic than we thought. So we used to think that earlier the neuroplasticity was something for young, the young, or for children. Now we realize that, adulthood really only happens at the age of 24 because the brain is still developing. But even after that, we have a capacity to learn and grow pretty much till we die. So we can change, we can learn, we can inhabit another mindset, but we have to make that effort. So that's the bit I wanted you to think about, the mindfulness. Was there anything else that you asked about?
No, I think you covered all the three. But yes, there was something else that I wanted to talk to you about, was practicing gratitude.
Yeah.
So, how does that help? And, can you give us a scientific angle on it?
Sure. So, there is research to show us that gratitude tends to first of all, the feeling of it tends to increase as we get older, which is no surprise to all of us. And the second is that it actually helps people be mentally stronger, physically in better well-being, better sleep, less stress, fewer aches and pains. And this was research that was done as a collaboration between the University of Illinois Urbana and the University of Zurich in Switzerland. And they had a group of, I think, over 900 people. And they had a vast age group, so from 18 years old to, I think, 75. So it was interesting how, gratitude, they found that irrespective of age, gratitude impacted physical and mental well-being. But it was the older generation that, tended to be more grateful. And it's again something we can inculcate, right? It's another skill, really. I mean, I found the simple act of just jotting 5 things that I'm grateful for in a journal every night is really useful. I also find, of course, that as I deepen my spiritual journey, gratitude comes more naturally and comes in more frequently in my day. But it's definitely something to work on if it is not already a part of your waking life.
Yeah, that's very true. I do the same. Every day I'm, thinking of 3 things that I'm grateful for, and it makes you much, much happier. So the happiness, apart from the longevity. So yes. I guess happier people live longer. So that's probably the connection. Yeah. Yes. So we have a participant who's watching right now, Sunita Kriplani, who says, lovely, great insights. Gratitude expands our life and makes us value whatever we have.
Very true. Yeah. Very true. Yes, very true. I'm, there's a nice quote I think I put in the book by the French novelist Car, where he says, Jean-Baptiste Car, and he says, people complain that roses have thorns. I'm grateful that thorns have roses. And I think if you can just, make it a practice to focus on the silver lining and make that the way that you live, life is so much more pleasant because you're just focusing on the silver and you're not even looking at the gray. So it's
you're absolutely right about that. That was a beautiful chapter. So, okay, let's move on to the body. But before that, there's one very interesting question on you. You have a bachelor's degree in genetics and your PhD is in toxicology. You're very young, and yet you have paid such close attention to an issue that's far more a concern for older people. How come that happened? And did your background in these sciences and the kind of research you were called upon to do lead you in any way to thinking not just about wellness, but about aging? Have you been doing this for long, and what led you to do it in the first place?
Binaji, basically, when I was doing my PhD at the University of Kentucky, my roommate once, I remember we both studying long and hard for one of these tests. And she, I was looking at, I think it was a pharmacology test. And we both, and research now in the United States or anywhere in the world really, when it comes to Western medicine is, you're going right down into the minute. It's molecular biology, obviously, as the word suggests, you're going right down to the minute. And she said, I don't believe this is the only way for us to find healing modalities. Like, this doesn't make sense to me that this is the only way to do it. And, we didn't have any exposure to Ayurveda. We had no exposure to a mind-body medicine. And, but that thought really struck with me. And at that time, I thought she was just trying to, not want to study, just sort of being like, this, is how you feel sometimes, like, why am I doing this? And I thought that's what she was doing. And then later, a really close friend was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome. And chronic fatigue syndrome is an, ailment that is debilitating, and there's a lot of fatigue and tiredness and pain. And the doctor said that there was no cure and stress was likely the culprit. So here was another indication that something that was in the mind was impacting the body in a really profound way. And that really got me thinking about this whole mind-body connection, and I wanted to study it more. So I went to the National Institute of Health, where I was lucky enough to get a postdoc with Dr. Crusos, who is sort of one of the pioneering scientists in mind-body studies, and he even has a syndrome named after him, and glucocorticoid resistance. And and under his sort of, in his lab, I was looking at the impact that stress had on the immune system, because I'm trained as an immunologist, and which is the body's ability to fight infection and disease. And when I was in that lab, we found that acutely, so even short periods of stress is really harmful to the immune system. Long periods of stress, now we know that other people's research has shown us, impacts our ability to ward off lifestyle disease. So whether it's cancer, diabetes, depression, heart disease, hypertension, they all have a stress component. But at that time, and chronic fatigue syndrome, of course, and autoimmune diseases as well. So literally every single disease state that we can think of, because acutely we're talking about infections, and chronically we're talking about all these diseases. So essentially we've got every single disease covered, and stress plays a role in all of them. And then I moved back to India, and this was about 15 years ago, and I wanted to start a family. So I was writing on health at home, and I was writing for a bunch of newspapers and magazines, Mint included. And I noticed that, we were seeing people, first of all, there was an increase in incidence of lifestyle disease in our country. There was also a reduction in the age at which Indians were getting lifestyle illnesses, right? So we get heart disease 10 years before the Western world. Hypertension, the same. Diabetes, the same. And India as a country has 20% of the global disease burden, but only 10% of the global health infrastructure. So we really can't afford to be this sick. We really can't. Prevention is truly the only way we can go. And I personally don't like being sick. So I'm always trying to find ways of avoiding that state. And I think, and I think we'd all be happier, right? I mean, if we were not falling as ill. And unfortunately, with these chronic illnesses, as you know, I mean, as we all know, they're chronic. And so there's a financial burden, there is a burden on the family emotionally, there is a bunch of stuff that happens around the human being where, other people end up suffering as well. So it just, prevention just makes sense. And unfortunately, it doesn't make business sense, which is why, we don't see more around it. But it really does make public health sense. So hence the book, and hence the thinking.
Yeah. A thought that came to me just now was that, we are in a country where Ayurveda and yoga are, just, there's nothing that one needs to spend that much on either of these things, Yeah. And why can't we actually bring the incidence of disease down in India?
Yeah.
It's really unfortunate, but I think we have to find some ways and means of spreading this out in India itself.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I feel like, yoga and Ayurveda are incredibly and very, very powerful tools. But it's remarkable to me how Indians in India don't, I know why, but it's unfortunate that Indians in India don't believe in Ayurveda. And we know why. There are a couple of reasons why, but It is unfortunate that
Yeah.
our ancient medical practice that is spiritual in its root doesn't have the kind of importance that it could.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I found very interesting in your book under the section of body was this gut brain microbiota axis, and equally important, the vagal nerve. Now, can you tell us a little more about what we normally just talk about a mind body connection?
Yeah.
And we think that has nothing to do with anything physical. But when I read your book and I read about that vagal nerve, it seems that there is a physical connection to, there's a physical aspect to the mind body connection. So, can
Right.
you tell us a little bit more about this mind body connection and the vagal nerve?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, the vagal nerve, the word vagal comes from Latin vagus, which means wanderer. And this nerve literally wanders. It starts at the brainstem and wanders through your lungs, your heart, your intestines, and wanders its way back. And it essentially touches on all your organ systems, including your intestines. And it is sort of it is a seat of your autonomic nervous system. It is a seat of your parasympathetic and your sympathetic nervous system. So your fight and flight and your rest and digest systems they rest on the vagal nerve, as does the gut brain microbiota axis. So the vagal nerve is incredibly important, and it is literally the physical evidence of the mind-body connection. Now, as you would guess, therefore, all the mind-body practices that we do, whether it's Tai Chi or meditation or yoga, they all tone the vagal nerve. So does singing, by the way. If any of you are, love to sing, it's great for your vagal nerve because it ends up massaging your vagal nerve, the singing, the act of singing.
Oh, you might actually start a whole host of bathroom singers here now.
It's great for you. So please go at it and tell your family members that I'm doing this for my vagal nerve. So don't stop. It's good for you. But yeah, so it's a really important nerve. So your posture matters, and there's like I said, it's the physical evidence for the mind body connection. So it's curious that we don't know enough about it. I think there should be a basic class in high school on basic anatomy and physiology, because it's remarkable. Even forget high school, even scientists are not really trained in anatomy and physiology unless they go into it themselves, because everything has become so specialized. But yeah, it's a really important piece of our physiology.
Okay, so you do, I know you do yoga because I've tried to contact you and you've been doing yoga at those times in the evening. And you've also gone on an Ayurvedic diet. Has that aided you in better health? And are there any studies, any research done on both these very strong Indian traditions that show how effective they are?
Yeah. So my book has quote studies that have been done, but I have to be honest with you, our studies are not strong enough, right? So they are not, and this is sort of it's hard also to conduct studies on yoga. It would be relatively easier, but Ayurveda is not that simple to conduct studies on them. However, just as I mentioned earlier, the absence of evidence is not the evidence of absence. So it doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Just because we don't have well-designed studies, a certain amount of money needs to be spent. We don't have the kind of cash America does when it comes to R&D, and it gets reflected in our in our scientific output when it comes to yoga and Ayurveda. Which is a pity. But in my own personal experience, certainly I found, yoga does everything that it claims to. So I sleep better when I do yoga. My mind is more, centered when I'm doing my yoga, and I feel I'm also sort of in a lighter mood with regular yoga practice. I've probably been able to keep diseases at bay. I'm very healthy. I've been doing yoga regularly, but that's not really, we don't know, right? We don't know because we don't have a control Sujatha to show us what would have happened if she didn't do yoga. However, with the other stuff, I know, because there are days that I don't do yoga and I don't sleep as well, and I'm not in such a light mood, and I don't feel as calm. So, and then about Ayurveda, I have been quote unquote cured from what Western medicine would call chronic illnesses, whether it's an allergy or an autoimmune situation, with an Ayurvedic diet and Ayurvedic medicine. So I completely believe in Ayurveda because I know that it works, and that's my first stop. Usually it is the last stop. People go to allopaths and then they go to the Ayurveda. And now I do it in reverse, because I find that when I go to the Ayurveda early enough, the situation gets nipped in the bud, and I also don't have to deal with the same issue again. So it's really win-win.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about the mind and the body. Just a question on the spirit. How does spirituality help in longevity?
Yeah. So, longevity is about adding life to your years as much as it is about adding years to your life, right? As you said, if you can be happier through your life with gratitude, then that's also adding years.
Right.
The quality matters. We know that the quantity is predetermined by our soul to begin with, according to our scriptures. However, please remember that the predetermination of our life is based on the number of breaths, right? And when we are stressed, we breathe faster, and we breathe shallower and faster. So what we're doing when we're stressed is that we're accelerating we're shortening our lifespan. And Western research shows us this at a molecular level. So the telomeres are these chromosome caps, if you will, and they're getting shaved off is an indication that your cells are aging. Now, the telomere shaving starts to accelerate with stress. So it's very interesting how that links with the number of breaths that you are taking, and links with what we know about aging. So there is that whole connection. But yeah, I'm sorry, I lost track of your question. You're on mute.
Yeah, we talked about spirituality and longevity.
Yeah, so that is one point. And then when it comes to research, there is, my book primarily quotes two doctors. One is Dr. Udwadia, who has found a link in his experience, between patients who have spiritual faith and their healing. And he thinks what happens is, this is how he describes it. He says their spiritual faith then allows them to have faith in me, and allows them to follow my instructions, and allows them to be at peace through the process, even if it's a complicated illness or a complicated surgery, and that helps them heal. The same experience was described by the director of the Sri Satya Sai Institute, which is based in Bangalore. And he said one piece of evidence that he found curious was that this hospital has a third of the post-operative infections of any other hospital anywhere else in the world. And he says he believes it's because of the high spiritual belief that exists in the patients, in the nurses, in the doctors, and because they are all aligned spiritually, so to speak, because the patient knows that there is, they can only do what they have to do, and God will do the rest. They allow their bodies to do their jobs, because our bodies are naturally geared towards healing themselves, right? Our bodies are exquisitely designed. The more you study your body, the more you realize there has to be divinity involved in its creation, because it's truly magical how you can heal. Yeah. And if the doctor is also aligned in the same way, where the doctor does his best, knowing that God will do the rest, there is a certain peace and a calmness to his or her intervention, and therefore he or she ends up doing their best. So given this sort of situation, which is very unique, right? You know how to get all these three forces coming together: the nurses, the doctors, and the patients having so much faith. But given that situation, it's interesting that post-operative infections are the lowest in the world. So it is so that to me is some serious evidence. And then generally speaking, they've found that people suffering from serious disease definitely benefit from spiritual practice and faith, whether it's cancer or heart disease. I haven't come across a study on mental health, but I suspect people with, I would bet my money that if you have a strong spiritual faith, a genuinely strong spiritual faith, you're going to be immune to mental illness. I mean, I would even go so far. It's like taking a vaccine.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yes. I agree with you there. I mean, then the mental thing shifts to another completely different dimension. That's true. So I wanted to talk to you about the pandemic that we are in and the impact it's having on individuals and families. So there's loneliness, there's friendships and relationships that are, getting affected, lack of freedom, there's a new work culture. All of this seems to be causing many mental and physical ailments. So people have also been introspecting, they've been relooking at their priorities and thinking about their lives. In your book, you've shared many aspects of holistic living. What do you think one should do in this situation, and what do you think will be of help for people to just get out of this?
Yeah, I think I really think having like I mentioned earlier, the focusing on the silver lining, right? Finding it in your life and expanding on what is possible within what is in your control. I mean, I think this is the golden opportunity for spiritual introspection. It is something to really seek out and nurture within ourselves. I think we've been saying for too long, I don't have time to spend with my family. I don't have time to spend with my family. And I think the forces have come together to say, here's your time. So I would make use of that. And I really think it's time for us to realize, that as Gandhiji said, there is enough for everyone's need, but there isn't enough for everyone's greed. I think that's time. This is our time to recognize that we've just taken too much from the planet, and we need to now find ways of giving back, find ways of consuming less. And I think we're already learning that, experientially, how little we really need through this time. But it's also an opportunity, I think, to really build on our physical and mental resilience. Like, I mean, Binaji, you mentioned the yoga class that I'm doing on Zoom. I've never had the chance to be able to do it so often. I do it 5 times a week because I can now.
Yeah.
And it's great because I'm able to do asanas that I couldn't do earlier, but now because I'm doing it every day, there is a sense of accomplishment. And of course, I'm reaping the benefits of it on a daily basis. I find that I personally am cooking more. I know lots of people are cooking more. I'm taking an art class and, sort of discovering the creative side in me, which is, wonderful for your well-being. I'm getting a chance to reconnect with old friends and family. I'm particularly getting a chance to get in touch with, my uncles and my aunts and people who otherwise I was quote unquote too busy to spend time with. And it's wonderful to receive their wisdom, and it's wonderful to hear their voices, and you just end up missing out on what really matters. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to reclaim that. Of course, there's a lot that's not in our control. We're all under some kind of financial duress. We're all under uncertainty. We all have the pandemic literally at our doorsteps. There's a chance that we could get it, but there's only so much you can do to control it, right? And once you've done what you can, you just have to stop thinking about it. So I think certainly stay away from the news. I think that's not good for your mental health.
Very